Specializes in the Middle East. Thank you so much for being with us. We've seen the tensions, have been running high for weeks now. We've seen clashes. This is a temporary measure. Do you think that Mohammed Morsi was right to give the army the power to arrest people?
Well, this is the president that only a few months ago was proclaiming that he had returned the military to the barracks, that he had restored civilian rule in Egypt. And now here he is trying to effectively force through a constitution which is proving so unpopular by using the military to underpin it.
But do you think he is using the military? Because in fairness, in the clashes that we saw last week, there were a handful of deaths. So in fairness, I mean, he's not saying... He's always said that if the constitution, if the vote goes one way, he'll respect it.
Well, of course, as you say, part of the reason that he's using the military for this coming week is because the police have effectively disappeared from the streets in Egypt. But it is... I think it's going to really lose legitimacy and credibility for a constitution that has to be underpinned by military enforcement in this way. And it's also a particular irony for the Muslim Brotherhood, given their history of oppression and imprisonment in opposition. It is a particular irony and very disappointing that they should be resorting to this at this particular juncture in power.
I guess on both sides we've seen a breakdown of trust. I mean, do you think that that's can't be got back in some way, or do you think the two sides are just not going to see eye to eye?
I think you're absolutely right that it has become very polarized, but I think it's also completely, it doesn't have to be so polarized. I mean, one of the criticisms of the way that President Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood have reacted is that they see all the opposition as being some kind of manifestation of the deep state or the former regime, the Falul, that wants to bring them down. And of course, there are elements of that within the current opposition to President Morsi, but that's not all it is. There is obviously a very popular and widespread opposition to this attempt to force through a constitution. And, the way to dispel the old regime would be to recognize that and to try and work with the opposition and understand that, you're not trying to work for a majority rule with something like a referendum. You're trying to work for a consensus.
Well, now we're going to see on Tuesday, we're told by both the Muslim Brotherhood supporters and also their rivals, mass protests across Egypt. That could escalate. What impact do you think that could have on the referendum on Saturday?
Well, it's very difficult to imagine how this referendum is going to be enforced. Although, if you remember, just before the elections, there was also massive unrest on the streets right up to when the elections were held last year. But there is obviously a deep structural problem with a referendum over a constitution that most people won't even have had time to read and digest. Never mind all the structural problems with the fact that the constitution was put together by an assembly that is not representative and was repeatedly criticised for being so unrepresentative. So I do think that the only way to dispel this particular crisis, and it is quite a large crisis that President Morsi has on his hands, the only way to dispel it is to talk to the opposition and to build consensus over a postponed referendum and constitution.
Rachel Shabi, author and journalist who specializes in the Middle East, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.